Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Mid to Late Stage Carers webinar for Rare Dementia Support. We will just allow people a few moments to enter the meeting, and then we'll start in a few seconds' time. Great. Well, it's lovely to have so many of you with us today. A very warm welcome to you on this one of the coldest mornings of the year so far. And we're very sorry not to be meeting in person, but as I'm sure you'll understand, getting to central London today would have been a challenge for most people, even without the weather. So you're very warmly welcome to join us today, and thank you all for being here. We've got a great lineup. If you don't mind, I will just give you a few housekeeping announcements. A brief reminder that I'm Seb Crutch, one of the psychologists and members of the Rare Dementia Support team. If I've not had the pleasure of meeting you before, you're very welcome for joining us. And if this is your first meeting with Rare Dementia Support, then again, a particularly warm welcome. A few housekeeping announcements are that we're recording the meeting. So if you hear interesting things that you want to think again about later on, or perhaps pass on to someone else to listen to, just an encouragement that you don't need to be frantically scrubbing down notes. We'll be recording the session and also sharing all of the resources that are mentioned during the meeting afterwards. We will also have the chat box disabled, but the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen is open. So we'd really encourage you to send in both questions for the panel at the end of the session to answer, but also your comments as well, things that you'd like us to read aloud in response to some of the things you've heard or seen, or in sharing your own relevant experiences that I can drop into the meeting throughout, and particularly in that later question and answer session. So please do contribute through the question and answer box. Also just wanted, before we get started, to give you a few brief updates, and one in particular, which Nikki Zimmerman was encouraging me to share about, is pointing out that for many people coming to this meeting, it's sadly too often an experience that the health and social care professionals around you may know less than you would like them to about the type of dementia that you and your loved ones are living with, or the kinds of support that you need. So just a brief encouragement that as well as the numbers of members such as your good selves growing at Rare Dementia Support, we've also seen a real increase in the number of professional members. So the number of people who are coming to us to ask for support, to learn more, perhaps for their own general education, so that they can be quicker to recognise the needs and experiences of people with rare dementias in the future, or perhaps in relation to someone in particular that they're working with at the moment, where they may not have met someone with that condition before, but by getting some advice and consultation with the direct support team or other members of RDS, they can feel that they can use their existing skills and help and support that person as best they can. So there's a growth in number of professional members. There's a lot of partnership working going on between members of the team and other large organisations, particularly the Alzheimer's Society and others around the UK and beyond, to try to increase the level of awareness about some of these conditions. But also it's so important that many of you are very kindly sharing your experiences of what would have made the difference at different points in your journey of living with a rare form of dementia, and seeking out the support that you need to make sure that you, and if you didn't get it, then that other people might get the right support at the right time. And we're really delighted that we, with support and leadership of Trish O'Hara and Karen Tapson, are launching a new what we're calling the Cascaders scheme. So we've got 15 pilot RDS Cascaders, that's members either living with a dementia, currently caring for someone, or bereaved carers, who are very kindly going to be going out on the road and sharing their personal their stories and information about different types of rare dementia and the support services available with community groups and particularly professional organisations right around the UK. So that will be starting early next year, and we're really excited to see how that awareness raising may draw people in. But almost enough waffle from me, just for me to introduce a little bit about what the session that you'll hear today is. So really this is a session about the later stages and preparing for the later stages of supporting and caring for someone that you love with a rare form of dementia. We've got a number of talks which I'll introduce as we go through, but really just wanted to briefly say that lots of people talk about a journey. Some people like that phrase, some people don't like that metaphor. Other people talk about the process of supporting someone living with a dementia. Other people talk about, I was with Mary Pat Sullivan in Canada last week as she launched our first sister service, RDS Canada, and she was talking about, through her personal experience, how she felt it was more like learning a dementia space, getting to know this new world that has some similarities to the world you used to inhabit, but which has many different characteristics as well, and you almost have to sort of map out the terrain around you. And of course, all of us will come to dealing with these challenges and experiences that you face in different ways. Some people want to live in the moment and don't want to think about tomorrow, and other people are very keen to flick forward and see and anticipate what might be to come, so that they can feel that they've put themselves in the best position they can to be ready for whatever decisions or changes might be afoot. We hope that what you hear today will be helpful whichever camp you're from, but we're also conscious that some of the issues we're talking about, you need to be in the right place to hear. So just remind you as we go that we are recording this meeting. So if any bits of it you feel aren't right for you or for right now, either stay with us and do what we always encourage, which is to take away what's useful for you and leave what isn't, or perhaps even to step out and save that chapter of the story for another day. But I'll let you obviously make that judgment for yourself. We've got 3 fantastic speakers being interviewed by members of the team, and then they'll all join us for a panel discussion at the moment. So rather than list off everyone who is coming to join us and speak with us today, I'll just introduce the first video, which is the fantastic Millie Vanderbilt-Williams, who's going to be interviewing Rabina Maslin, one of our RDS members, about her experience of the later stages care programme. So over to Millie and Rabina.
Hi everyone, I'm Millie and I'm here with Robin, and we are going to talk a bit about Robin and her experience caring for her husband Phil. And yeah, we're really excited to be here with you today, and we are joining you from Faversham, which is where me and Robin both live. And we first met when I was running an arts group locally, and Robin and Phil used to come along. And now I work for RDS, and we're able to work with each other in a different way, so that's really lovely. Yeah. So Robin, first of all, could you just tell me a bit about you and your husband Phil, who's living with PCA?
Sure. Well, Phil and I think have been married 31 years now. We met in our late 20s. He's someone who's had a series of different businesses, from art dealing to driving chauffeur-driven limousines and meeting famous stars. I mean, he's done a bit of everything. Very funny, very kind, good at DIY. He loved being a dad. We've got one daughter who's 30. He's very laid back, very good listener, always here for me. He was diagnosed 5 years ago, age 62, but we'd known for a while that something was wrong, and we were I remember reading up MS, had he had a stroke, what was it? He had his eyes checked for ages. Anyway, it turned out to be PCA, and when he was diagnosed, I retired at that point because there was an organisation restructure where I was working, so that worked out quite well. So that was however many years ago, 5 years ago now. And yeah, we've had, the first year was quite tough, I think. So I wasn't expecting to retire. We had lots of sorting out of money, medication, all that stuff. Year 2, we started getting involved in groups and things. That's when we came along to yours. Phil started going to day centre, etc. And I would say we had several really calm, good years when we were living well not with COVID, living well with dementia. Yeah. But then I think about a year ago, he started having some quite violent outbursts out of the blue. They were becoming, well, he had 3 in all, though that was enough, always at other places, and then started getting aggressive with me. So he went into what's a nursing home, in fact, 8 months ago in April. Yeah, he's been ever since.
Yeah, and the nursing home is quite nice there. You go and visit him quite a lot there.
Yes, well, because he had what they call challenging behaviour, and I needed him to go somewhere fast because I was scared at this point and was trying to get a diagnosis and find out what was going on, but it was just too slow. So the only place that could tell him is in Pembury, which is about an hour's drive away, and then he stayed there. But it's a lovely place. They sorted out the behaviour which was due to, he was having focal seizures, and because of the dementia, he'd sort of come out of them and didn't know what was happening, was very scared. So they sorted all of that out. I go twice a week. I enjoy my visits. It's a very peaceful, lovely place. So yeah, it's been a good experience. It's a shame it's so far. It's good.
So you have some amazing strategies that you use to help care for Phil. Could you tell us a bit about some of these strategies?
Yes, I'm not sure they're amazing. That is what we do. I mean, he's an hour away, so I only go twice a week, which I think some people would find quite shocking. But I go and I spend 3 hours when I'm there, so it's a sort of takes most of the day. And we have quite a routine now. I've tried out a few things. We go. He remembers who I am. We have a hug. We have a coffee and a chat. We walk in the gardens. We have a beer and listen to Hancock's Half Hour. We tried different things, but that's the one that works best, and we haven't worked through them all yet. He has lunch and I feed him his lunch, and then we have listened to music a lot. We've also, during the time that I've been visiting him in the summer, I really wanted to take him out to the pub, but initially I was worried about that because would he go back into the home afterwards, having rumbled that he was going to be there. And then when I did try and get him into the car sometime later, he just couldn't get in. So there's a little summer house in the gardens, and we pretended it was a pub. Various friends have come along. I get out his proper pint glass. We pretend to go in and order him a pint. But whether he's rumbled it or not, he really enjoys it. We've got some lovely photographs of that.
Amazing.
Yeah, he's got an Alexa in his room, so we were building up a song list over some years, really. So he or the staff can just say, play my favourite music, and that's been very good. Yeah.
That's really, really wonderful. And you also have some strategies for caring for yourself as well. Could you possibly tell us a bit about them?
Yes. Well, I think I've always been someone, if I compare myself with some other people I know that I think are very, very selfless, I've always been quite keen to look after myself as well. And I've been known to say, what about me? So it gives you a flavour of it. But I think after the initial year after his diagnosis, when everything was calm, I joined an art group. I'd go once a week. And I still do lots of art. I'm very amateur, but I just really enjoy it.
Because I've been to one of your exhibitions in town, and it's amazing.
That's rather misleading. It's just our art group occasionally puts on a show. But yeah, that's been a great source of new friends, actually. I've got to know people locally, which I hadn't before because I was working in London. I'm part of a book group, a real lifesaver apart from RDS, which has been great because otherwise I might never have met anyone else, or we might not have been PCA. There's a group run not that near to us, it's about half an hour away, called the Young Ones, which was set up by the Alzheimer's Society, in fact, for early onset for the people and their partners or whatever. And we've become really good friends. We carried on meeting outside during lockdown. We're now at the end of the late stage, all of us, but we still meet once a month. We meet socially. We've got a WhatsApp group that's been tremendously helpful for all of us, I think. I've also took several respite breaks where Phil went into a care home locally 3 times for 2 weeks each time. And again, I don't know many other people that have done that. Partly it's hard to set up, but it made the whole transition when he did go to a care home easier for both of us, I think. And then I go up to London when I get the chance. I do loads of knitting. I did just recently, my father, who's 93, was diagnosed with cancer. And so he's sort of end of life as well, but nothing dramatic's happening. But I did have a major wobble then. I just felt like my life had turned into a tragedy. I'm sure people are familiar with this. But I have a counsellor that I see every now and then, just a local one that we've got an agreement. I can email and say I need a session, and she just helped me see it as part of life, and that I could be happy and enjoy Christmas as well as being sad. Yeah, sorry, I'm upsetting you now. Yeah, so I think I'm actually quite good at looking after myself. I've prioritised that as well as looking after Phil.
It's really, really important, and it's so helpful to hear about all the different ways in which you do that. So something else that you've been involved in is you've taken part in the 8-week later stages programme as part of RDS. Could you tell us maybe about some of your experiences with the programme or anything that you've taken away from it?
Well, I'd heard about this programme and I'd expressed interest a while ago, but it was always full. And actually a place came up at the end of the summer to start in September or October. And it was just perfect timing for me because Phil, when he went into the home, was losing weight dramatically. That's all sort of levelled off. But he is, we are late stage, you're never sure whether you are or aren't until you think, yes, I definitely am. We are. So it was very good. There was sort of about 8 of us, and Claire Waddington. Sorry, it's because I've got many. So Claire's been facilitating it with other people like Nikki Zimmerman and others joining her. And there's a programme that goes through things like sensory stimulation, nutrition, diet, and so on. And there are about 8 of us people. We always start with Claire inviting us to say how we are, which is very sort of cathartic. You can just say, fine, or, things are awful, or share something we've tried since the previous week. And I thought it was really excellent, actually. It was timely. I learned a lot. I was able to ask and contribute things as well, because, you learn from each other too. And I found particularly helpful, actually, particularly when I knew my dad was ill. We had a session on funeral planning and brain donation. And it just sort of dispelled a lot of my fear, which is just sort of, what do I do, Tara? I can't cope with this. Suddenly it was, well, this is what happens. And there's also a week on palliative care and pain management. So a lot of difficult questions were raised, and I felt sort of calm and informed afterwards. So yeah, it was really good.
Is there anything else that you want to add about the later stages programme, or about anything else that you think that would be useful for people to know about?
Well, I was thinking about this. I think one thing is brain donation, and I know Phil wants his brain to be donated because of where we're at. I mean, it's Christmas. I had this wobble with my dad as well. I just can't go there at the moment, but I will. But just if other people aren't there yet, maybe do it sooner rather than later. And funeral planning as well. I just can't, just can't go there. I mean, I may have another 6 months and I have plenty of time after Christmas, but yeah. And the other thing really is to just say how sad it is how services have gone downhill since the pandemic. They certainly have in our area. And I think if there are people that can set up these early onset groups, that's been an absolute lifesaver for me. They're not necessarily rare dementias, we're just all diagnosed young. And RDS is there, but more distance. I've also got a friendship group called PCA Pals. We've been on holiday together, it's been great, but we all live quite distant, and it's nice to have a few people that you can actually see locally. Yeah, I think that's all.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing so openly and discussing all of these things with us. I'm sure everyone in the web now will have found it so helpful to hear from you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you both to Millie and Robin there in particular for a really incredibly honest and encouraging sharing of their experiences and of the later stages group. And certainly that's something which we would encourage you to reach out to the direct support team if that's something that you might be interested in. And I think Rubina gave a really great description, not just of the content of it, but the way in which it works. So the idea that these facilitators and guest facilitators, this idea that no one has all the answers and there are different expertise to be gathered, but critically also that people like Robin feel able to both to contribute and to learn from other people within that group. And something else I really personally valued really about what you said, Robin, there was your honesty in describing all the steps you have taken, all the things you have done, but also acknowledging there are other steps that you can't bring yourself to take at the moment. And so that's really helpful because it's difficult, I would imagine, for some people listening to some of the messages that we'll hear today and thinking, I don't feel, that's great for them, but I don't feel able to do that right now. And just an encouragement that for all of us, all of those steps take or a fight sometimes to build up the courage, the energy, just to have this mental space to look forward. It can be really, really hard. And so if you're feeling stuck today, in amidst all the talk of things that can be done and steps you could take, please don't feel in any way condemned. Please feel known and listened to, that it's really, really hard sometimes to step out of the moment and look forward to what tomorrow might hold. So thank you so much, Rubina. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce another video. And so this time it will be Claire Waddington, who you just heard about from facilitating the later stages group, interviewing Gus Ashley, another RDS member, about her lived experience and also about the Road Less Travelled programme. So I will hand over to Claire and Gus.
Good morning, everybody. I am absolutely delighted to be here today with the wonderful Gus, who cares for her mum, who is living with FTD. So thank you so much for joining us today, Gus. It's really wonderful to have you here with us. I wondered if you could start by just telling us a bit about your mum.
Yeah, all right. So I suppose a starting point is that she was diagnosed with the semantic variant of frontotemporal dementia in January 2020. And I suppose like her first visit to the doctors had been about 6 or 9 months before, when we realised that she was missing words and there was a few things that were not quite right. So it took a little while to get the diagnosis. When we got the diagnosis, the psychiatrist didn't really tell us very much, but the main thing he said was there isn't any treatment for frontotemporal dementia. But when things get bad, then there's antipsychotic medication. So, but he also said that you as a family, like me and my dad and my mum, would go on a kind of a dementia awareness course. And so I was hoping that we'd have sort of a space to answer any kind of questions then. But as we all know, that was sort of the beginning of lockdown, really. And so we never really got any dementia awareness or anything like that. And initially things were all right. The main thing was that my mum would get confused. By that time she'd forgotten how to cook, and so some household things had changed, and we'd realized also that she couldn't be, we wouldn't leave her alone at any point, just in case something happened, and we just realized that we needed to be around. But you know, she was coping we all were really well at the time when she first got the diagnosis. But during lockdown, things developed really quickly. Just things like, well, I suppose key point is that there was a point when she went missing and we had to call the police, and so yeah, that was a kind of thing. But also I think there were some more challenging behaviours that came up, and realised it was really difficult to reason or talk through a situation that it wasn't really working, having conversations and understanding. And she would get really confused about, for example, an appointment. If she knew that she needed to go to an appointment, but she couldn't understand the time difference between now and when the appointment was. So she'd get quite agitated because she knew she needed to go to an appointment, and it was really, yeah, it was difficult. It was quite tricky handling those kind of situations. But I suppose that was 2020. So in 2021, sort of in the springtime, I think gradually things have got more and more difficult for me and my dad. And I suppose it's sort of this thing that probably a lot of carers can relate to, is that, like, at the time you think, I can do this, we can manage, it's all okay. But yeah, just there were cracks, and it was a really stressful time. But it got to a point when I was a bit run down and quite ill, and my dad really needed a bit of a break himself, and so my sister, my sister arranged for some respite care for my mum, and during her stay in respite care, her medication got changed. I think, like, she had some more sedatives added or something like that, and I don't really know what caused it, but my mum developed a stoop during her stay in respite care, and unfortunately when she came back home after her 2-week stay away, she was wandering about at night time, and I think my dad hadn't woken up and realised that she was wandering about the house, and she fell downstairs and she banged her head. So after that she went to hospital, and I think it was at that time when we realised as a family that full-time care was probably going to be the best thing. And I guess sort of part of the reasoning definitely was the fact that daytimes were manageable, but because unpredictable things were happening at night time as well, that felt like that was a point that was more than we could handle. So yeah, so since then mum's been in full-time care. She has had to move around a little bit, but really because there was a home that wasn't able to care, like, to give her what she needed, yeah, so it took a little while, but she's in the right place now, which is really great.
Thank you, Gus, for really, really generously sharing a bit of that experience of supporting mum at home and that transition into a care home, because the night times just became too difficult for you and your dad. That's really helpful to know that she's now in a place where they're providing the right care for her as well. And you and I have previously had discussions about some of the fantastic strategies that you use to support your mum in the care home. And I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit about some of those strategies that you use.
Yeah, I can have a go. I suppose there isn't really one strategy. I think it feels like over time different things have helped at different times, but I feel as though I've learned a lot from supporting my mum with dementia, and there's been a lot about how to support her, but there's also been a lot about how to support myself, and I know that you're talking to me because I did the grief course with RDS, and I think that was a really, well, it was definitely a really helpful thing, because for me, the whole, like, the dementia diagnosis is what it is, and was really difficult, and it is difficult to support someone with dementia and to see how they change, and just how quickly things can change. But the thing, I suppose for me, it was one thing to support my mum, and always just finding strategies to work out what she needed, or how to talk to her, how to find a way around whatever issues were coming up. But the thing that was even more difficult was dealing with my grief about it, actually, and I can feel it coming up, and that's cool. But whenever I would talk to any professional or anyone, and I know I can honestly share this with you, because we did the late stage carers course, and every single session when it was my time to talk, I just had this bit where I just had to cry, and once I'd got my tears out of the way, then I could carry on. And it was so nice that to be on the grief course, because I suddenly realized that I had a space for it, because in the past, this grief thing, this emotion, these tears would pop up at different times, and I just feel really like, oh, I don't know what to do, not now, I haven't got time for it. And I didn't really have a time, I didn't have a time for it, and I didn't have a place for it. So it was always this thing that I just like, oh, just it's not very, it felt like it's not very I don't know, this thing, it felt a bit messy, this thing that comes up all the time. And so it was amazing to be in the grief group, and to know that, like, once every 2 weeks I had a place for grief, and I had a place to sort of go into it and sort of have a look at it and pull it apart a little bit, and rather than this thing that I would normally be shoving away, and it's like, okay, I just need to get this out of the way and I'll be fine. So yeah, and I suppose alongside that, I always heard people say things like, oh, well, I know you're caring, but you really need to look after yourself. And sometimes that kind of thing, you just like think, but what I really need to do is look after my mum and my dad. And you're saying I need to look after myself, and I just didn't really compute. Like, it's not on the highest level of needs. But I think getting the space during the grief group helped me to see that, like, if I could work things out for myself, if I had a bit of space for myself, then it enabled me to talk to others about what I might have needed, or things that would help me to do what I was doing, or yeah, it just helped me to find a way to take a step back and to see the bigger picture, and to understand how important it is to look after ourselves, and you can't pour from an empty cup and things like that. But what a difference it makes. What a difference it makes. So I don't know, I feel like I've rambled. I'm not sure if I answered the question. But
Gus, you answered that question really wonderfully, and I just really wanted to thank you for your generosity and your openness in sharing how much of an impact it's had on you, to have that space, that acknowledgement of that grief that you're experiencing, and that validation for your experience as well. So just to clarify for those that are joining us on the meeting today, the grief route that you're referring to is the Road Less Travelled program, which focuses on the experience of grief and loss in people who are caring for somebody living with a rare dementia. That's really helpful that you've given us that first-hand experience of the impact of that group on you and being able to share that with others as well. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to what you've already very kindly shared?
I suppose thinking about it, although I said there's not really one tool that's helped me, definitely things like something I recognise I use every day is that being more compassionate to myself, and like recognising that I can have sort of quite critical voices in my head sometimes, and I'm really happy to say that now I do have those critical voices, but I also have the ability to like, hold on, I think you've just missed something. I can be a lot kinder to myself as well. Yeah, and I think there's so much when you're caring for someone that is out of control. So I go and visit my mum, but I only get the opportunity to do it once a week. Like, she's not so close to where I live, and if she's not in a good place at that time, then it can be really easy to feel like, well, in the past I've sort of felt like I've done something wrong because she's not happy to see me or something like that, or sometimes to feel a bit disappointed, or to sort of feel like, can I do something but I don't know what, and I think I feel more able to know that I'm not in control and I can't always make a difference, and that is okay. That is okay.
That is so important, what you've touched on just there, having that ability and giving yourself permission to be kinder to yourself, and that importance of self-compassion. I think that's such a wonderfully helpful thing that you've shared. And I just wanted to say again, a huge thank you for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute privilege to have this conversation with you.
Great. Well, just to echo Claire's thanks to Gus for a fantastically evocative and beautifully phrased description of some of the challenges and experiences that she's been going through in looking after her mum. And Gus, I found it so helpful that when asked about strategies, you emphasised not just specific things that were helpful, but that constant challenge of recalibration and needing to be ever adaptable. As you acknowledge that different things have helped at different times, and I'm sure that will be something that feels exhausting to many people on this webinar, that constant need to be anticipating, resolving, recalibrating, adjusting. And so thank you very much for acknowledging something that many other people will be going through, and also for acknowledging just that challenge of what it means to be compassionate to yourself. It's often said, as Gus said in chatting with Claire, that thing about you must be kind to yourself, and we know that's both vital and also incredibly difficult for some of you, and some of you will be out there listening and feeling kind of trapped, as if you can't let go, you can't acknowledge that you can't control everything because there's not as much around you in terms of the support that you perceive. But it's just an encouragement, I think, in what Gus was saying, that sometimes it can feel totally overwhelming, like there isn't the support around, and yet sometimes they just come up without you realizing, these spaces where you can step back, where you can see that bigger picture she was saying, and suddenly you have a space to think differently about what help or support might be there, or how your own role might be changing. So thank you very much for a really, really thoughtful and influential conversation. Now moving on, it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Libby Salno onto the screen. We're delighted to have Libby with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Libby. Libby's a palliative care consultant and researcher, and also the lead author of a really highly influential Lancet Commission on the Value of Death. So lots of us have been really anticipating your talk today to us, Libby. Thank you. And we're delighted that Libby will be around for questions on the panel at the end. So I'll hand over to you, Libby, to introduce yourself more fully in your work. And thanks for being with us and for encourage everyone to listen in and do be sharing reflections via the Q&A box as Libby speaks. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks so much, Seb, and great to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk through some of these difficult issues, and it's been really helpful to listen to the two speakers before, and I really echo everything that Seb was saying around the kind of eloquence that how they've articulated a lot of the challenges, the highs and the lows, caring for yourself, caring for the person living with dementia, and how that changes at different stages. And so I do want to say, you know, we're going to be discussing quite hard things over the next kind of 20 minutes, and this can be really difficult. And I really appreciate how tough it can be to discuss these issues of loss and grief, of caring, of love, of distance. So do take what you can from this, and if you need to take and step out, that's fine. But I want to create a space here for us to talk really openly about these issues. And Gus really mentioned that in that previous video, of the importance of giving space to these issues. And in my experience as a palliative care doctor, and I see people at home in London, so I'm a community doctor, and I do also work in hospitals and hospices at times, but I see people at home who are dealing with issues around grief, end-of-life care, and loss. And actually what is the most valuable is to give space to this, because often there isn't space in our daily life, our daily world, to talk about these issues. Often people want to kind of brush them under the carpet. They're difficult, and emotions can be hard. But my experience is that they only get bigger if you don't give them space. And actually by giving space, Gus was talking about almost kind of doing her kind of grief work, getting that out, and the relief that you can find after that. So I hope that this next session, this next 20 minutes will in some part give you that, and do come back. I've got some resources and different things to think about that you might want to then reflect on and talk within your own support networks, both professional and otherwise, to kind of expand on these. So it's a bit of an idea to give you a sense of some of the things that would be important to think about, discuss, for you to then take away and do in your own time. So again, my name is Libby Salno, and I'm a palliative care doctor working in London, mainly based in the community, as I said, and I'm an academic, so thinking about how we can improve issues of end-of-life care for everyone, working at St Christopher's Hospice, which is down in South London in Sydenham, and also at University College London. So what I'd like to cover today is to first talk a bit about some of the different terms that we use, because it can be confusing, the different kind of language and terms around caring and dying as people get less well. To think a bit about what's important for you to know as carers, and when do you need to know that. Importantly, how you can access support and access more information on things, and then to think and pause a bit and look more broadly at some of these challenges, and share some of the research that I've been involved in. So first, a bit about language and terminology. Now, there's a bit of a kind of internal debate and discussion within palliative care about what we should term palliative care as. It's quite broad. That broadly, there's a difference between palliative care, end-of-life care, and then hospices. And I thought it'd be helpful just to say what each of them are. So palliative care is an approach that improves the quality of life of patients and their families who are facing life-threatening illnesses. And what the important thing about palliative care is, it's not just the physical symptoms, say pain or kind of confusion or distress that people are managing, but it's also the psychological, the social, the spiritual. So we call that holistic care. So trying to look at the whole person and the whole family or the whole community that they're living within. And crucially of that is the quality of life of caregivers. And we've already had a bit of a reflection, a discussion about how hard it is to care for yourself. But the approach of palliative care is to explicitly care for the person living with that condition, but also those around them. So that's what I spend a lot of my time trying to support people and think about ways to do that. Then you've got end-of-life care, which is more focusing on the last months, days or weeks. So that very short time or that shorter time around when someone really is approaching the end of life, when they are dying. And so that's quite separate. Palliative care often can be done for many years before and kind of come in and out. It's an approach that runs alongside treatments that might try and improve the illness. But end-of-life care is really for that time when people are not having the active treatment to change the illness, but they are in those last days, weeks or months. And then hospices are organisations, often they're buildings, but there are some virtual hospices that provide palliative and end-of-life care. It can be provided by many other places, and I'll come on to that. But they often have inpatient beds where you can stay for a short time to manage difficult symptoms, or when some people go there for the end of life, so those last weeks of life. They also offer home care, often outpatient clinics, gyms, support groups, counselling and bereavement support. So those are the differences between some of the terms used around in this area. So thinking now about palliative care and dementia, palliative care is for all life-limiting or all chronic incurable conditions. Although it developed initially in response to cancer back in the 1960s, and the UK was one of the pioneers in developing this approach, with this realisation that actually people who were had incurable illnesses were often being kind of neglected or ignored by the medical or clinical profession and not given any support. So palliative care, it was a social movement, first of all. It arose in response to that, to say actually these are important times that need proper attention and focused care. So there's now a realisation that this needs to be for everyone dying of all different conditions, but there is significant inequity in accessing palliative care, and that's particularly known for older people and people living with dementia. People can access palliative care at the beginning, so at diagnosis all the way through to when they may be dying, and I'll come on to a bit about what that might look like. And it can be provided across different settings, so in hospitals, in people's own homes, in care homes, in clinics and hospitals. And it can be provided by a range of people. I'm a specialist in palliative care, but also general practitioners, people working in memory services, and then a range of different physiotherapists, occupational therapists or volunteers. So it's a large range of different people who can be involved in supporting at this time. I think this is can be a bit of a hard graph to look at, but what we try, this is part of the research that's being undertaken to understand that how people die and how people experience those last months of life can be very, very different. And so people need different services and different help at these times. Now, the black line is with cancer, where often people are quite well until they have quite a clear decline with, say, chemotherapy no longer working. And that's a very clear indication that their life may be shortened by this. And it's much easier to prognosticate, to say what time people may have left. What's much harder is with organ failure, so that's like chronic obstructive airways disease, COPD, or heart failure, is that you may have lots of times where you have a bit of a crisis in healthcare, you go into hospital, but you kind of get better, you get back up almost to your baseline. So that's the red line, where you have lots of dips of going into hospital. But the difficulty with physical and cognitive frailty, which comes in the blue line at the bottom, which dementia would come into, is that it's a very kind of continuous decline. And although you may have times where the person may go into hospital and say have an infection and find it hard to get back, it's a kind of continuous change, which makes it very difficult to know at what point should palliative care be involved, or what point should big decisions about healthcare be made. And so that's one of the challenges that is important to think about when caring for people with dementia, is how do we know the right time to think about the future? How do we know what's the right time to begin thinking about caring for them as they get less well? And it's much harder to predict that. And you will, I'm sure, have seen that that kind of uncertainty is much bigger with dementia. This is just another picture, the last picture from research, that shows you may start at the beginning. So starting in the blue with disease management, it might be that people are on medication to try and slow the disease. but that symptom management can run alongside that. So it's not either or palliative care or kind of treatment for the illness underlying it. They often run at both times. And what it might mean is that at the beginning, palliative care might just come in to help with some difficult symptoms, but actually might not be very involved at that beginning point. But then as time goes on and the person gets less well, palliative care might become a bigger part of the approach, and the disease management a less big part of the approach. So it kind of changes over time. And there it might be that there are hospice inpatient units, but also they support both with the person as they're dying, but also into bereavement, and very much have a big role then playing to support carers, family members, other friends who've been involved in that. So it's not the kind of older models of palliative care where kind of you have treatment that's active treatment and then you move into palliative care. And that's very much changed now. It's a much more integrated and kind of continuous model. So there's three things I thought would be helpful to talk through in terms of what's important to know, and what I was thinking, what could I share with you about my experiences of caring for many people with dementia. So the three things I think is thinking about decision making, thinking about support in different settings, and then support at different times. So the first thing, making decisions, and this may be something that has been covered in previous topics and previous sessions, or that you may have been aware of, broadly comes under the term advanced care planning. And that's about really making decisions about what is important to the person who is living with dementia and what is important to the people around them caring for them. Now, often one of the criticisms of advanced care planning is that it can often be quite negative, saying, I don't want this, I don't want that. And so we're trying to reframe that and start with saying, what is important? What do you want? What do you value in who's around you, the kind of care you're delivered, and those kind of things? What's important? So what matters to you? That's the important question to start with. And then you can move on to what things would you wish to avoid. And some people that I go to see at home are very clear. They say, I do not wish to return to hospital, or their family members may say, we do not wish them to be taken into intensive care or resuscitated. We want them to be at home and cared for. Other people say, we would still like to go to hospital for anything that is reversible, for antibiotics or fluids or etc. So it's important to kind of understand, I talk about where people's red lines are. You know, what are you really clear about, and what do you need more information about to decide, or what might you be making one decision now, but in the future, what might change? And then there's a big focus on location of care. We've heard a bit about transitions and people moving from different places of care depending on their needs. So often we talk about where it's important to be, and then at the end of life when someone's dying, where would they wish to be? And so those are some of the discussions that I would help people have. And these can be conversations, and that's really the most important part, understanding and sharing those conversations with people around them and other healthcare professionals. They can then go to be written statements, just where people's wishes can be captured and shared, for example, with the GP or with hospital teams. And they can then go on to be legal documents. And I'm sure you will have been considering and thinking about some of the bigger ones like LPA, lasting power of attorney, and then some of the more specific things like advanced decision to refuse treatment, where you can say one thing or certain things clearly that person wouldn't want while they still have capacity to make that decision. And then things like do not resuscitate decisions or end of life care plans. So there's a kind of range of how you record them, but the key thing is to have these discussions early enough if possible, or if they're no longer possible to be had with the person, to make that decision based on how you know, the information you know of them. But I also really focus on the importance of involving the caregiver's needs, because actually it's not only down to that single person about what they would like to have or not, it affects the whole family. And so it's important those decisions are made jointly to understand the needs of everyone involved in that. Thinking about different settings. So palliative end-of-life care is delivered across all settings. So it can be delivered in the home when a team like my team come out to see a person living with dementia and their family or caregivers, and look at all the different things, what adaptations could help, what community services like district nurses and general practitioners, etc. How can that all be linked in? In hospital, if people are staying there, all hospitals have a palliative care team. And so they would be able to come and review that person and help out with the team who have admitted them. And that's really important often with decision making around, is this the right place to be? What benefit is the person getting? How can we make sure that the hospital stay is tailored to get the maximum benefit for someone with living with dementia? Clinics, so memory clinics or other clinics that people may be being seen for, say, heart failure or other conditions, all those clinics can provide palliative care. All care homes will have a palliative care team linked to them through their general practitioner. And so people can be seen at home, and the palliative care team, I regularly review people in nursing homes and in residential homes. And then in hospices, which, as I mentioned, are buildings where you can go and stay either as an inpatient or access some of the groups, counselling, support, gyms, etc., and volunteer support that I'll come on to a bit more in a minute. So the key thing is, the setting shouldn't determine the care you can have. The care is available, and these discussions are available regardless of where people are. And then coming on to different times, and I looked at that, I showed you that model before, kind of with the two, that's called the bow tie model, the two triangles. So the key thing is it can be flexible. It's not either or. So often at a serious diagnosis, palliative care may be brought in, not because someone is at risk of dying, often for many years, but to have some of those big discussions at a time where someone is still able to engage in that and express their wishes. So often I come in and I see someone at home or in clinic to talk as much as someone wishes to about what the future might look like and about some of those important decisions. We may then step back, we may, we're not needed, things are quite stable. And then we may come back in after a few months or even years for some symptom management. If things are difficult, if sleep, distress, agitation, if maybe the carer is finding the shifts and changing behaviour hard. So we might come in then to support with specific symptoms or specific situations. And then again, we may step back as a team and then not come back in until someone's much less well. And that may be with frequent chest infections or something. And that's then a point to think about, okay, what's the best model of care for this person? How can we really support them? And then we may be involved then through that person's end of life and their dying, and then into bereavement. And that support might be mainly in the home, or it might be in a nursing home, or it might be in multiple different places. It might be in hospital, hospice admission, and then back at home, or back to a care home. So it's flexible across, depending on what that person and the people supporting them, their needs are. So the key things about how to access support, GPs are one of the main points. Often palliative care services need a referral from a general practitioner. So they're the key person to ask, who is my palliative care team? Who, every postcode will have an area that, a service that covers their area, and your GP will know that. You'll also have a local hospice that will cover your geographical area. And you can Google that. If you go onto the Hospice UK website, which is one of the websites I've linked, there's Hospice Finder, and you can just put your website, your postcode into the website, and it will tell you what your local hospice is. And they usually have advice lines and telephone numbers that you can just call to ask about what's available, what things are available in my area. People looking after the person living with dementia from a kind of clinical team or memory services, they will also know what the local area's palliative care team is. And we often receive referrals from memory services, and often we do joint visits and work out, because obviously that person obviously is known well to that service. So it's helpful to go together to be introduced. Lots of websites, so Marie Curie, Hospice UK, Alzheimer's Society, Dementia UK, and Compassionate Neighbours is something I'm just going to come on to. And the NHS has also some really helpful web pages talking through the decisions and looking at the different resources that are available. But a lot of my research has been looking at palliative care beyond professionals. And we know that good access to clinical care is a crucial determinant of good experiences, and we know there's huge inequity in how people are able to access that around the UK and around the world. But what we understand is issues like loneliness, exhaustion, the stigma that people can receive, but also ideas of caring, intimacy, love, loss, meaning and purpose, all of these really crucial human responses to a serious illness, to someone dying, and to loss. They can't be fixed just with a great GP or with a great palliative care team. These are societal issues, really, that require a much broader response, within which an excellent palliative care and clinical response is needed. there's been a huge amount of research over the past kind of 5 or 10 years looking at the role of social networks, the role of relationships, the role of connections in health. And increasingly, we're looking at the role that is at the end of life or in serious illness. And we know there's a huge role for what these different networks can, what they can lead to for people with serious illness alongside good clinical care. And one of the key things is understanding how to support family members, friends, neighbours, that broader community that is around someone, both understanding how to support them, but also understanding the support they can offer is key. And that's that much broader question that, that I think is so important and that I've been trying to understand through my research. So this is also a broader issue that people are trying to tackle. There's been a proliferation of books. So all of these different books have recently been written around understanding care, grief, loss, death and dying. And these are just some of the books that have been published in about the past kind of 3 or 4 or 5 years, some of them in bestseller lists. And so these are issues that affect us all, and that people are really trying to have a conversation about what it's like doing this in 2022, you know, in a contemporary world. And there's also been lots of different reports, which is great, from Marie Curie, from the government, from lots of different areas. So lots of kind of global and UK bodies are trying to think, how can we improve these? These are issues that will affect everyone. Their journey will be different, but these will affect everyone. And this last quote here is from the Lancet Commission on the Value of Death, which, an interesting title, but was trying to understand death and dying are universal issues, and actually we must begin to value them and their care in life. And actually it's by the devaluing them and kind of hiding them away that is making it much harder for people when they approach these issues to manage them. And so I was the lead author for this report, which pulls together a lot of these issues around services, around palliative care, but also around the kind of societal understanding really of how these are experienced. So the key challenges really are in this area is that doctors and nurses aren't great at managing death, dying and grieving in hospital. People, despite lots of pushes towards good palliative care, it's getting so much better, but people often find this awkward to talk about. They find it difficult, and people may try to shut down conversations when you try to bring them up. We also know that access to end-of-life care, that's ELOAC, is highly inequitable in the UK and globally. And we also see that we get this over-treatment and under-treatment. So some people get huge amounts of over-treatment that they may not wish to have, that isn't going to give them any benefit and may prolong their dying. But other people are getting under-treatment where they're not getting access to palliative care or pain relief or other important care. So it's not as simple as saying people need to go to hospital less. People need both more and less of certain types of treatment. We know that important conversations are not taking place, and that's for many, many reasons. And that people are unfamiliar with death and dying. And I often find this when I go to see people at home and we'll talk about these issues. People would just say, I don't know where to start. I haven't seen anyone die now, whereas our older relatives, generations before, would have seen people die in early life. For a good reason, life expectancy is much longer and people are living later. But it means we're not familiar with this. This isn't something that we're seeing. Traditionals and rituals and kind of scripts, your kind of narrative about how to manage care at this time often is being lost, and people talk to me about being kind of lost. They don't know where to start and they don't know how to manage these time. The media is not helpful. Often it kind of sensationalizes death, but the kind of normal experience of dying in home with carers coming in or dying in a nursing home, that's not present in the media. That's not expressed, and people talk about not almost understanding these experiences and not seeing anyone discuss them. And we've spoken in the Lancet Commission around the balance of care and dying and grieving has shifted. It's kind of gone into intensive care or hospitals, but actually communities and families are not being supported to manage these difficult issues. And we focus about how important it is that these are grounded in the community. You know, that's really where people are living and experiencing in its broadest sense. So I've been working over many years with projects around the world to understand, well, how could this be different? How could we shift this? How could we develop a more responsive approach to care at this time? And one of these responses is something called compassionate communities. And actually your group that as I understand it, is one example of how people can come together and begin challenging these issues, learning together and shaping their experiences together. But this is an example of a project in Kerala in India where there was no palliative care, it was under 1%. And through this approach of compassionate communities, so going out to communities and building their responses to this alongside clinical care, they've improved the palliative care access to over 70% of people in need. And it's provided by doctors and nurses, but also a large number of volunteers. And this is a picture at the bottom of someone being fed through a nasogastric tube, and the nurse in red is supporting the wife to do that. So it's about sustainable care and supporting caregivers to provide the best care for their loved ones. So I wanted to understand how we could use the learning from this model, so into London. So we took the model from Kerala into a hospice in East London, and we developed the Compassionate Neighbours project, which is the same, going out and asking questions of the local area to say, what's important? What's it like to live, die and grieve in this community? And how could we make it better? And then people come forward, we build them into networks, we do some training, and people are then matched with someone locally or take on more kind of advocacy roles and support people locally. And the key thing is this isn't about creating volunteers as kind of a new load of professionals, as many professionals, but of people being enabled to build relationships locally and support each other. And that then supports further community dialogue, which then goes round. So we've now got over 2,000 volunteers who are working in networks to support people who are dying, caring or grieving around the southeast, called Compassionate Neighbours. And again, you can Google, there's a big website looking at that. And this is one example of compassionate communities. Many other people are doing it not under a label of Compassionate Neighbours, but doing it through religious groups, through neighbourhood associations, through other areas, and people coming together to support people with these universal but difficult issues. So just to bring it together, because I want us to have time for questions for these issues. So palliative and end-of-life care are important for people living with dementia and for those caring for them, but they're often not accessed enough. And often there's a sense that it's only at the very end that these services can be involved. And so we need to challenge that and understand that actually they can be involved at many different points and be seen as part of the team. Professional services are important, but actually they're not sufficient, and we need to have a much broader understanding of how we support people, how we create support networks, how we support those around people living with dementia, and have early conversations, because these issues are really difficult. They can be really upsetting to talk about, but what's even harder is not talking about them and then meeting them in a kind of crisis way, where actually then they're much harder to manage. So I'm going to leave it there. And come back to answer any questions that you may have.
Libby, fantastic. Thank you. A tour de force overview, and just incredibly helpful for you to set specific clinical services in that wider societal context. So thank you. I'm going to start asking you questions, if that's okay, that members on the call have sent in. But if everyone else who's on the panel would like to put their cameras back on and come and join us, we can be more of a conversation, which would be great. Hi everyone. Libby, I was going to start, if I may, just by saying one of the books, I'm not a wide reader, not as widely read as I should be, but one of the books you showed at the end by Atul Gawande called Being Mortal is I think at the high up the list of books one would recommend if you've been lucky enough to read it already. And one of the things I really drew away from that, which really influenced me talking to my own family about some of these issues you talk about, was just that encouragement to have early conversations. One of the questions we've had in from someone on the seminar today is kind of what happens if you haven't done that. So particularly thinking about people with dementia, with language loss, and where some of these decisions are hard to make when you feel like you're having to make a decision on behalf of someone else. And I just wondered if you had any general comments about supporting, how we as a community or you as an individual clinician support people where those conversations haven't been had and where there's uncertainty about what someone would want.
Yeah, and that's really common because none of us can predict the future. So even if you have conversations early when the person living with dementia has capacity to share their thoughts around that, you still can't predict everything that may happen in the future. So we need to be, realistic about that. Different unanticipated things will happen. So that's when we then bring in clinicians or doctors, nurses who know the person well, ideally, but that's also not always possible, with family members, carers, other people who know them well, and have what's called a best interests meeting for big decisions around, is hospital the right place to be cared for? Do we want to now look at focusing at home, or is moving to a care home going to be the best interest, or having a care package at home? So, big decisions like that are then you have a best interest meeting where you run through all the different options. You look at how they had wished, what other decisions they've made before, how that might influence, to get a picture. But it's not only the person, it's the people around them that have to be considered. So whilst they're the kind of duty, you've got the duty of care to that individual person, you must look more broadly at supporting everyone. So that's how you then make decisions if the person can't consent or actively share their own views.
Thank you. I think that'll be really reassuring for a number of people. Just before I widen out the discussion a bit, Libby, couple of other questions have come in. You've explained really neatly, I think, how palliative care and the specific clinical skills aren't just for the end of life and can be integrated with other forms of care at many different stages. There's a couple of questions have come in either about what happens if you've spoken to your local hospice, for example, and haven't had that sort of response where people have said, we're not for you yet, kind of response, or other people where they've said they've had a really positive early interaction with palliative care, but then there are other professionals they're recommending getting involved, like geriatricians. So just kind of how to manage that integration of different pieces of the puzzle.
Well, as you mentioned in your opening, actually, Seb, often you know the person well that you're caring for, you know them the best, and often it's the healthcare professionals that don't know as much, and you're often needing to educate them around that, and that is really hard. And we find that with all sorts of palliative care. Often, people have their own issues about their own mortality, their own willingness to talk about this, and so there are many barriers to talking about this and getting a referral into palliative care. So that can be one of the hard things at the beginning. But all hospices have got numbers and phone lines that you can talk through. So ideally going through a GP, because they can do the referral. But if you're finding there's a bit of a block there, the GP saying, oh no, it's too early, this isn't for you yet, but you really feel actually you need support at an early point, because often GPs do think that it's only for late stages, very end stage, when it really isn't. So you're often having to do some of the education, which is not easy, but unfortunately is the reality. So look on websites, have a look and kind of understand some of the language that's being discussed. It's often quite helpful to read through that, because it will talk you through that. And then calling your local hospice or your local palliative care service directly. The number will always be online, and just say, look, I really feel I need these issues. And we receive these calls in our service often where they say, my GP's not willing to refer, but actually I really feel I need the support. And so we can take that referral through there directly. So I wish the system was perfect. It absolutely isn't. And, we know, looking at all the research and the data around the UK, it's so inequitable. People who really need the service are often not getting any service. And we look at the days before someone dies and how much palliative care people get. With cancer, it's often in the years, months and months and years. And with dementia, it's usually in days or short weeks. That's the time. And it's so hard to support people when you've only got a few days or weeks in that acute phase. So what we want to do is elongate that time so that people have got much longer being supported for. But you had to advocate then for yourself, which is a hard part of negotiating care, and it can be exhausting. But I would contact them directly if you're finding that it's difficult to get a referral either from your GP or from a memory service or from another team, and give them a call. And if you go onto the Hospice UK website, as I said, you can put in your postcode and it will tell you what your local one is, and you can call them directly.
Great, thank you. Encouraging to have a few different routes, but also your acknowledgement of the kind of wider experience and role that groups like this, as you kindly acknowledged, and others can play in supporting each other, not just a sort of a rare breed of clinical professional. That's great. Just broadening out the conversation a little bit now, Rabina, and also for Gus, who's not here, lots of comments have been flowing in saying how generous you were to share your stories, how helpful and lots of people sharing similar experiences. A couple of questions that came up arising from the experience of people going in either to respite care or into care homes, and whether Rabina, one person in particular, was wondering whether you'd noticed particular kind of declines or changes during that time, and how you'd cope with that, because obviously you've gone through a period of being so fully responsible for someone you love for so long, then handing over that responsibility and care must be tough to see when things inevitably then change.
Yes, people have asked me that as well separately. I think with respite care, Phil had 2 lots of 2 weeks and then a 1 week, because usually places won't take someone for less than 2 or 3 weeks because I suppose financially, but also for the person to settle down. I would say in the 2 week slots, yes, he may have declined slightly, but he bounced back when he got home. So it didn't have any long-term effect. It was more, slight confusion. Oh, I was there, now I'm here. When he went into the nursing home that he stayed in, because he was having this challenging behaviour, like huge violent outbursts, throwing furniture, shouting for the police, swearing, it was very frightening. He was put on risperidone, which is an antipsychotic, and he started that before he went in, but it just didn't work fast enough. And in fact, the underlying cause was seizures, not psychosis, although I think he had some psychosis as well because he used to hallucinate. So yes, he did. I think with the risperidone, others will say if this is correct, it was a bit like a chemical cough, so he was very, very dozy. But they reduced that again when he had the anti-seizure medication, and it's all sort of levelled out. So I think cognitively he improved at that point. Actually, it took about 6 weeks or so for that all to be sorted out. And then he was losing weight dramatically, which then stabilised and then got worse again. And I remember thinking, is this my fault? Is he going downhill because I put him in the home? And I spoke to the Admiral nurse and just asked her, talk me through this. And she was very reassuring. She said, well, you couldn't have kept on looking after him at home. We'll never know whether he would have been better if he'd stayed at home. But, he's content, I would say, where he is. He had already started losing weight. So on balance, I think we are where we are. Maybe if they'd been able to give him the seizure medication earlier, I think he could have stayed at home longer, but ultimately he would have needed to go somewhere because I personally just couldn't have coped. So I hope that's helpful. That's where our personal experience.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And anyone else, please do feel free to come in on that. But I think really, really reassuring for other people to hear it's not just about sort of inevitable decline, that you feel reassured with the care that Phil's receiving, and also as you say, the improvements that one can see as the right care package or the right medication or just the right situation can sometimes level certain situations out. That'd be really encouraging for people.
Yes. Can I just add something very briefly there? I think if he'd been at home, we wouldn't have had the seizures and the medication sorted as quickly because he was there, they could see what was happening. I suspected it, so did his neurologist, but the NHS being where it is at the moment, they just couldn't diagnose and sort that fast enough. And the other thing is, in terms of palliative care, I feel that it's a nursing home. He's getting excellent care and support, and so am I, through this particular care home, both through the nursing and care staff there, but also a very, very knowledgeable GP who's a specialist in dementia.
Thank you, both excellent points. The next question I wanted to come to, again, any of you could speak to, but I wonder particularly if I might direct it to Claire and you Rabina, was about someone who's written in just saying, I'm not good at looking after myself. What should I try and step back from? So this idea of self-compassion and kind of where one gets started.
I'm happy to come on this first, but it would be great to hear from you, Rabina, too, if you'd like to say something about this. I think this is a really important thing to address, and probably something that a lot of people listening in today and watching today will be in a really similar situation, that it is really hard to care for yourself when you are providing care for somebody living with any form of dementia. And just to say, it's it's probably going to be really difficult, if not impossible, to care for yourself if all of your resources and all of your time are going into caring for the person living with dementia. So what I would say probably from our end is increasing the support that you have around you and the support for the person living with dementia, whether that might be things like increasing the care in place at home if the person is living at home, whether it might be looking at having short respite periods at home or in a care home, as if people have already spoken about today, and whether that might be starting to have those conversations about, if the person is at home, whether it is feasible to continue to care for the person at home, or whether it might be time to think about transitioning to another care context to meet that person's needs, but really importantly, to meet your needs as a carer as well. Robina, I don't know if you had something to add on this as well.
Yes, I think from what I've observed and from my own experience, lining up residential respite care is extremely stressful and difficult psychologically, and also often just practically. I was able to do it because I could pay. If I hadn't been able to, it would have just been, you know, much more difficult, but not impossible. I wouldn't put people off. And I think what I also observe is people that don't manage to get respite care or support around them, sometimes because their partner refuses, is they just get more and more tired to the point where a crisis will happen, and then someone will go into perhaps a respite or long-term care in a crisis, and then you have no control, and it's just much more difficult and traumatic for everyone. So I'm not minimising how difficult it is, particularly if someone is refusing support, because Phil was always very easygoing in that respect. I'd say, I'm really tired and I want to see my friends, would you mind, you know, this, and I'd say this place, it's a hotel, but with care. And we sort of joked about that. But yeah, I'm not minimising how difficult it is, but it becomes easier once you've done it once. So yeah.
Great, thank you to both, and thank you so much for being so mindful of other people, different people's situations as well. Thank you. I wonder if I could come, Libby and Nikki, to you both sort of jointly next for a couple of questions about stages. So essentially, the question for some people is what defines a late stage, but it also relates to someone else wrote in saying, I think my mother is mid-stage. I'm not sure whether that's mid-stage to late stage, or whether that sort of staging process is supposed to be declared by a doctor, or is more of a kind of a family judgment sufficient? And the person says, I haven't really thought about early, mid, late, and in those sorts of terms until I saw the terms used for this seminar. So I wondered, Libby, perhaps if you might say a bit about how you think of stages, or even if those are words you use, and maybe Nikki, if you were to say a little bit about what we mean, why we have different early or mid to late stage groups, and when people might, for example, consider trying to access the later stage care program that we talked about.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the most important stage is a joint decision, because the people caring for the person with dementia are the ones who know intimately what's happening, and there's changes in behaviour, in eating and drinking, sleep-wake cycles, weight loss, some of the things that have been mentioned in the Q&A today. You know, all of those come together to produce a kind of an understanding of where someone is. It's not a single point that will change that. So we often in palliative care get referrals when people are in a kind of what would be a late stage, so often say bed bound, not eating as much, you know, much sleepier, those kind of points. But the key thing is really to have referrals earlier as well. And as has been noted by people in the Q&A, often hospices aren't ready for that referral, and that's difficult. But often we would say, you know, there is a role to be played at the beginning, you know, middle and end really, but not continuously to stay. You know, palliative care doesn't need to be involved for kind of 7, 8, 9 years, but often at the beginning and early stages in decision making, when you can make as many decisions as possible whilst that person's able to take place, then it may be that they have a role when things are changing slightly, so they're beginning to spend more time at home, or less able to get out. Cognitive changes are more significant. Behavior, distress, mood may be changing. We might be able to be involved there, along with, say, memory teams and the general practitioner. But then at the later stages, and I would mean that when someone really is in, say, the last months of life, for a palliative care stage, it's a different meaning for within stages of dementia. But in terms of where we would then be involved and stay involved, that's when we would start thinking more around kind of last year or last months of life, and how can we really set up some of the support to make that time as well cared for as possible. So I think we would probably use those terms differently to how you would use them in the dementia kind of specialist support groups. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, that's great. Nikki.
Thanks, Libby. It's really, really useful to put it in those sort of terms and perspectives. So for us, we always used to do just the carers support group meetings, and we recently changed over the last couple of years because we want to meet everybody's needs as much as possible. And we know that when people are first diagnosed and they're first in that caring role, they want to know lots of information, they want to know that guidance. But dementia and the journey of dementia can be many years, and it's a long journey. So perhaps knowing a bit about what's going to happen but not actually being there is two different things. And we also found that people that had been attending our groups for many years were getting the repetition of things that we were still telling them. So we decided to change them into two areas: early to mid stage and mid to late stage. Everybody is welcome to all, but obviously for more sensitive issues like today, we did put a little bit of a caveat and a bit of a warning up, saying, if you're not in this stage, you might not want to hear it. You might want to prepare yourself, and that's all good and well, but we don't want to shock people of, oh goodness, I've only just been diagnosed and this is what they're telling me already. So I think that's really important. With the programs that we do, the late stage carers programs and the low road less travelled, these are for people that are caring for somebody at a late stage, and there are reasons sort of for this. We do have limited spaces. We also we need the groups for people to be living at that sort of time in similar situations. Robina's been in the group and feels living in a care home now, as are some people that attend those groups, but not everybody. But they're all experiencing the same sort of issues and living with it at the moment, and it's not quite the same of, I want to know what's going to happen, because everybody's journey is different. And I think we can certainly help people with information and sort of preparing them of these are the sorts of things that may happen in the future, but it is slightly different than actually attending the groups together. I hope that helps.
Really helpful, thank you. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to one of our fantastic members, Richard Munslow, who certainly challenged my thinking about this separation, as you said, into earlier and later stage carer meetings, and sort of trying to tailor things for different people at different stages. So thanks. I'm very conscious of time, and I'm particularly painfully aware that were it not for a train strike, this is where wouldn't be having to sort of cut the conversation off, but rather we're just moving the conversation into kind of sharing coffee and biscuits. So I'm really sorry to do this to you all, but just to, we've had a fantastic response, many generous comments, and some questions which we haven't got around to covering today. Just to try and grab a couple and wrap them up. Someone was asking about advances in trials for people living with posterior cortic atrophy, PCA, in the mid stages, and if I could just direct you towards, and we'll send you the link round to the PCA webinar that was on Friday, particularly thinking about clinical trials opportunities, and possibly linked, I don't know, to someone with PCA or maybe another condition, a question about physically, is it their partner or loved one is abnormally leaning to one side, and whether that's normal, what is that? And just to say, yes, that's something we see in quite a number of people, as the balance systems of the brain are distorted and people kind of get lost in space and don't know what's the right way up. So not necessarily a sign of physical weakness or distress, just the brain not quite being able to combine all the different sensory and physical information to adopt posture in the way that it usually might. Other questions and comments we will try and address in our in the email that Millie and the rest of the team send around after the meeting. A huge thanks to Millie, not only for being on the screen, but for organising everything in the background, and a real thanks, of course, to all of our speakers. And rather than me saying anything, I'm just going to read out a comment from someone in the audience saying this is a truly wonderful webinar. Every speaker and contribution has been beautiful, open and thoughtful. Thank you to all who have shared and the compassionate doctor. So Libby, I think that means you. So a huge thank you to all of you for contributing. A reminder that we're here not just for these big meetings, but the direct support team would be pleased to hear from you at the contact at email address. A reminder of all these regular groups, not just the later stage and living grief programs that you've been hearing about today, but of course our regular peer meetings that are happening monthly now. If you would like to find out more information about that, please do feel free to get in touch with Nikki and the team. And also, just to finish with a big thanks to the National Brain Appeal for all their help and support in fundraising for this free rare dementia support service that we're trying to grow. And as we try and reach out to more and more people, we're really grateful for them. If you have any fundraising ideas or want to get involved, we will also be sharing the link about how you can talk to one of the National Brain Appeal team to share some ideas. We're delighted that they continue to open up opportunities for us, like the recent announcement of the Chelsea Garden called Rare Space that will be happening in May next year, with the design influenced by people on this call and others connected with rare dementia support. So overall, huge thank you. Oh yes, sorry, also just a brief reminder that we're closed between the 23rd of December and I think the 3rd of January. So just a reminder that if you have support queries that you would like to address before the Christmas period, to try and be in touch with a few days to spare before that 23rd closing date. Huge thanks again to all the speakers. Thank you so much for being here. Sorry to have run over by a couple of minutes. And in this cold weather, we wish you the very warmest of holiday seasons and look forward to seeing you again early next year. Bye for now.